all living organisms on Earth can be categorized as consisting of one of two different cell types, prokaryotes or eukaryotes. Organisms that lack a nucleus are referred to as prokaryotes, and in fact pro means before and karyote means kernel, referring to the nucleus, so before the nucleus existed. And these organisms have been on the planet for about 3 to 4 billion years, as opposed to eukaryotes that have been on the planet for about 2.7 billion years. And the EU stands for true, so true nucleus. These can be further categorized into three different domains. So domain bacteria and domain archaea are both prokaryotic cells, whereas domain eukarya are eukaryotic. Now the first two don't have any nucleus because they're prokaryotic, and eukarya does have a nucleus. There's a few other things that distinguish these three domains from one another. One is that bacteria and archaea, neither of them have membrane-bound organelles, whereas eukarya does have organelles. Also, the cell sizes varies. So bacteria and archaea are quite small in size, whereas about 1 to 10 microns in size, whereas domain eukarya are larger, from 1 to 100 microns in size. They also have differences in their cell wall chemistry. For example, bacteria contains peptidoglycan if it's present. Domain archaea has pseudopeptidoglycan, or a protein, and eukarya either does not have a cell wall if it's, for example, an animal cell, or if it's a plant cell or a fungi cell, it could either consist of cellulose for the plant cell or chitin for a fungi cell. The membrane chemistry, or the cell membrane chemistry, can also be a little bit different. So domain bacteria contains the Earth's most abundant organisms. So there's more bacteria on the planet than there are any eukaryotic organisms. They're very structurally simple compared to eukaryotes. They have a nucleoid region rather than a membrane-bound nucleus. So they do have genetic information which they can replicate and pass on, but it's in what's called a nucleoid region. I'll show you an image of that in a minute. They also have a cell wall. The cell wall is very important. It surrounds the cell membrane and it protects the cell and prevents it from bursting if it absorbs too much water. It also gives the cells their shapes, which can be either rod-shaped, round, or spiral. And many bacteria can swim in fluids with long hair-like structures called flagella that look like a tail appendage and allows the cells to move around. So here's a basic image of representation of bacteria cells. So you can see the cytoplasm surrounded by the cell membrane and a cell wall surrounding that cell membrane, and it basically looks like a capsule. The flagellum off the end of it, which act like a tail and whip around for movement. It's also got cilia, which are little hairs around the outside of the cell wall. And inside you can see that there's a nucleoid, which is a strand of DNA. It's stored quite differently from eukaryotic cells. There's three basic shapes of bacteria. One of them is this sort of tic-tac shape here, which is called a bacille or bacille. Here is a cockeye shape, these little spheres or balls. And the easiest one to remember is probably spirilla, which are these spiral-shaped bacteria. Now, a lot of bacteria are pathogenic, which means they're toxic. They can have a toxic effect on you. And some of the ones you might be familiar with that are cocci are things like strep throat. They can cause pneumonia, meningitis, or if you've had a bad salad, that food poisoning you might have had from that could have possibly been from E. coli, which is a cockeye shape. This is one of these round ones. Bacilli, on the other hand, can cause things like ear infection, urinary tract infection, and one of the most sort of famous bacilli is anthrax, a deadly disease that kills cattle. But not all bacteria are pathogens. In fact, without bacteria, we wouldn't be able to function as humans. They can also create a lot of products. So, for example, these bacteria here can create yogurt when you add them to milk. Soy sauce is also a product that is fermented using many bacteria. There's also research in the States which is showing that E. coli is going to be used to produce biodiesel. And of course, bacteria is absolutely essential for helping to decompose matter and continuing cycles of nutrients that we absolutely rely on to survive. So something you may or may not be aware of is that there's an estimate that the number of bacteria on your body outnumbers the number of eukaryotic cells you have that make you 10 to 1. So there's 10 times more bacteria on your body you're carrying around to one cell that actually is eukaryotic. So the domain archaea was really only recently discovered in about 1977, and he detected a gentleman by the name of Carl Woese studied key molecules and many cell types and detected differences that suggested that some prokaryotics represented a completely different form of life, and that's when the domain archaea was established. So it's fairly recent. They resemble the domain bacteria superficially, but they have different cell wall structures, and they could be the closest relatives to eukaryotes. So this could be the cell that could have, or closest cell that could have eventually evolved into eukaryotic cells. Some of these are referred to as extremophiles because they can live in extreme environments such as extreme heat, acid, or saltiness. This is somewhat misleading because researchers have now discovered archaea in a variety of moderate habitats, including soil, swamps, rice paddies, oceans, and even the human mouth. The domain eukarya contains organisms with cells that are much more complex than those of prokaryotic organisms. There's an astonishing diversity of organisms that are eukaryotic, which includes humans, our fellow animals are eukaryotes, as are yeasts, mushrooms, and other fungi. Plants are also eukaryotes, and so are one-cell protists, such as amoeba and paramecium. Despite their great difference in external appearance, all eukaryotic organisms share many features on a cellular level. And one of those obvious features that sets them apart from prokaryotic cells is their large size. In fact, they're typically 10 to 100 times greater than prokaryotic cells. Another key difference is that the cytoplasm of a eukaryotic cell is divided into little areas called organelles, or little organs, if you like. And these are compartments that carry out specialized functions of the cell. In general, organelles keep related biochemicals and structures close enough to make them function efficiently. At the same time, they keep potentially harmful substances away from other cell contents. This compartmentalization into organelles also saves energy because the cell maintains high concentrations of each biochemical only in certain organelles rather than throughout the entire cell. So we're going to be looking at organelles and cell structure of animal cells and plant cells and comparing and contrasting these two types of eukaryotic cells. So you can see this animal cell here is much more complex than the prokaryotic cell that we looked at previously, and you can see that it is compartmentalized into a whole range of different organelles, including the mitochondria. You can see the Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, there's also the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and of course the nucleus. And all of these are organelles which are membrane bound, and they're all contained in the cytoplasm inside of that cell membrane. Each of these has its own specific function that we will study in more detail. Now, a plant cell is very similar to the animal cell that we just looked at. It has membrane-bound organelles, but it has some additional features or organelles that you won't find in an animal cell. So, for example, note these organelles called chloroplasts. Now, chloroplasts are very important for photosynthesis, and therefore you won't find them in animal cells, but they're critical for plant cells. There's also the large central vacuole, which can store water and help the plant cell remain turgid or stiff. Plant cells also have a cell wall. In this case, most plant cells are made of cellulose, a structure called cellulose. And that cell wall surrounds the cell membrane, and you won't find the cell wall in an animal cell. So try to sort of consolidate your knowledge and summarize what you've learnt about eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells and the three different domains to which they belong by drawing up this table, and see if you can identify whether each of these domains is prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Do they contain DNA, and if so, in what form do they contain DNA? For example, is it a nucleoid region or is it contained in a nucleus? Do they have a cell membrane? And if they do, what does it consist of? And also, do cell walls exist in that domain? And if so, what does that cell wall consist of?